This happened to me around 2 years ago. I was on vacation and visiting Japan. There were so many things to do, like visiting beautiful landscapes, trying out Japanese food, and even experiencing their amazing culture. Honestly, it was one of the best countries I've ever been to, until this happened. It was just another regular day, and I had planned to go out and explore some malls so I could get some shopping done. While I was heading out to the mall, I came across this ad that read, "Rent a girlfriend or rent a boyfriend." When I read it, I laughed at first. So I asked the guy passing by, and he told me that it was a real service. The only thing is, you can't have an intimate relationship with a rented person. I got really curious because I couldn't believe that such a service would even exist. So I decided to give it a try, and I rented a girlfriend for the day. I got a message on my phone from the rented girl, and she told me that she would meet me in a public park in about half an hour. So I agreed and I went to the park. Around 25 minutes later, the girl finally reached the park and called out my name. When I looked at her, I swear, she was really beautiful. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I thought that I was dreaming, but obviously I wasn't. She greeted me and introduced herself. For the sake of privacy, let's call her Akane. We exchanged a few words, and she asked me what I wanted to do with the entire day. So I just told her the truth, that I didn't believe the service was real. She smiled and assured me that she really would be my girlfriend for the entire day. She suggested that we could go and explore the city, and we could do multiple different activities, as I was just a tourist. I agreed, and we headed out. We went to the movies, played video games at the arcade, and we even had a wonderful dinner at night. She never left my side throughout the day, and honestly, I really liked her. Once the day was over, she asked me to drop her home, and I agreed. So I called a taxi, and we both got in. Once we reached her place, I thanked her for the experience and was just about to leave. Akane suddenly stopped me, and I asked her what had happened. She smiled and had a blush on her face, and she told me that she really liked me, and she'd never experienced this before. The truth was, I liked her as well. She asked me if I wanted to have coffee with her in her house. At first, I hesitated and asked her if this would create problems for her job as a rented girlfriend. She assured me and told me that the choice of dating a client after her job was her personal choice, and it had nothing to do with the job. As I already liked her, I didn't want to argue, so I agreed. Once I walked into her place, I smelled something. It was a disgusting stench, like rotting meat or something, but I wanted to be polite, so I just pretended like nothing happened. We sat on her couch and spoke for a while. Then suddenly, she placed her arm on my shoulder and gently told me that she needed to change her clothes and she would be back in 10 minutes. I was blushing and I agreed, and I thought I was gonna get lucky that night. Once she left the room, I tried ignoring that disgusting smell, but I couldn't. So I headed to the bathroom to freshen up. But once I opened the door of the bathroom, I saw something so terrifying that I still get nightmares about it to this day. There was a bathtub that was filled with the rotting corpses of young, dead men. I was in shock, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I started panicking and started to think what to do. I got out of the bathroom, and what I saw next made me realize that I was in the house of a psychotic woman. I saw Akane standing at the bottom of the stairs with a creepy smile, and she was holding a sharp knife covered in blood. She suddenly said, "I was your girlfriend for a day, but now you're gonna be my boyfriend forever." When I heard those words, a cold chill ran down my spine. She suddenly ran towards me and tried to stab me, but I quickly got out of the way and punched her. She fell to the ground and was knocked out cold. I ran out of the house, thinking that she might get up. So I quickly called the police, and they arrived in a few minutes. Luckily, Akane was still knocked out and she did not wake up. When I told the police what had happened, they were shocked as well. I quickly ended my vacation and went back home. It's been 2 years since that incident, and to this day, I can't even use dating apps, thinking that I might meet some girl who might be just like Akane. I was 15 years old, and I was on my way back home from school. When I reached my house, I noticed that someone new was moving into our neighbor's house. My dad was having a chat with the new neighbor guy. He was an older man who was about in his 40s. He smiled and greeted me, and I did the same. I didn't think much of it, so I just went back into my house. A few days later, I was playing with my dog in the yard. I looked over to my neighbor's house, and I noticed that my neighbor was watching me play from the window. I was surprised at first, so I just ignored it, and I continued to play with my dog. It had been around 20 minutes, and when I looked back again, the guy was still staring at me without changing his expression. I felt that was creepy, so I just went back into my house. Later that night, I went to sleep early, as I had to wake up early for school the next day. It was around 2 a.m., and I just woke up because I was feeling really thirsty. I'd always kept a glass of water next to my bed, so when I finished drinking, I was about to go back to sleep. That's when I heard something. It sounded like heavy breathing, as if someone was breathing right into my ears. At first, I thought it was my dog, but it wasn't. I looked around in my room, and that's when I noticed a dark figure standing right outside my window. I couldn't make out who it was, as it was too dark, and I realized that the heavy breathing was coming from that dark figure. I panicked, and I screamed really loud, and I ran to my parents' bedroom. When my parents woke up, I told them everything, so my dad grabbed a baseball bat and ran to my room. But when he reached my room, he couldn't see anything or anyone. He told me that I must have had a bad dream or something, but I couldn't believe him, so I slept with my parents that night, and they were okay with it. The next day, the exact same thing happened. Heavy breathing and a dark figure standing outside my window and just staring at me. Fortunately, my window was always locked, so that figure could never come into my room. I told my dad about it, and to make me feel better, he told me that he would set up a camera in my room just for safety. The next night, I didn't hear any breathing. I didn't see any shadow at my window, but I heard something moving near the garbage bags outside my house. I slowly approached the living room window so I could get a peek outside of what was happening. At first, I thought it was my dog trying to get into some leftover food or something. But when I peeked through the window, I saw something so disgusting and horrifying that I almost threw up. It was my neighbor, and he was searching for something in our garbage bag. He pulled out something in excitement and started smelling it. When I got a better look, I realized that it was one of my used tampons. My neighbor quickly took it and ran back to his house. I felt so disgusted and humiliated that I ran up to my parents' room and I told them everything that I just saw. My dad quickly called the police, and they arrived within few minutes. When the police went to the neighbor's house, they arrested him. The next day, I found out that the neighbor was a registered offender and had abducted multiple young girls. But the worst part was that the police found multiple pictures of me in his bedroom. Some of the pictures were of me playing with my dog. Other pictures were of me in my school, and the creepiest pictures were of me sleeping in my bed. I was so traumatized that I didn't come out of my room for many days. Since that day, I've always been careful about trusting a stranger, and I always wonder what would have happened if that guy would have come into my room while I was sleeping. I guess I'll never find out. I was 19 years old at the time, and I loved camping since I was a child. One day, I decided to go camping alone in a forest, which is known as the Freetown State Forest, which is in Massachusetts. I decided to start hiking in the afternoon, and before I even realized, it had already become dark. So, I thought it would be a great idea to just stop and set up camp. After I set up my tent, I had a glass of wine and enjoyed the cool breeze and silence in the forest. I started feeling tired and sleepy, so I decided to call it a night and go to sleep. In the middle of the night, around 3 a.m., I suddenly woke up to some strange noises outside my tent. It sounded like multiple footsteps, as if they were running around my tent. At first, I just thought it could be a small animal, like a rabbit or something. So, I just ignored it, and I tried to go back to sleep. I woke up again, and I heard that the noises of those footsteps were getting closer to my tent every minute. The weird thing was that the amount of footsteps had increased. At this point, I started panicking, and I thought to myself that it could be multiple wild animals, like foxes or something, who were just trying to get into my leftover dinner. I was alone, and I didn't have any way to defend myself from these animals. Suddenly, the noises started fading away. It sounded as if whatever those animals were, I decided to go away from my tent. I felt relieved, and I thought that I could finally get some sleep. But I was wrong, and what happened next scared me so bad that I still have nightmares about it. I suddenly saw a pair of tiny hands pressed against my tent. I freaked out and covered my mouth before I could make any sound. The hands looked like they belonged to a child, but what would a child be doing in the middle of the forest after midnight? All of a sudden, there were multiple hands pressing against my tent from the outside. I started hearing children laughing and rubbing their hands against my tent. I got so scared, and I didn't know who they were and whether they were children or something completely demonic. I couldn't move at all, and before I knew it, I passed out. I woke up the next morning, and when I looked at my tent, there were no hands pressing against it. I thought that I might have had a nightmare or something. But when I got out of the tent, I saw something that made me realize that whatever happened last night was not a dream at all. My tent was surrounded by multiple footprints of children, and the strange thing was that the footprints did not have any trail that either led towards the forest or towards my tent. It was as if the footprints just appeared outside my tent out of thin air. I was terrified, so I just grabbed my bags and made a run for it, leaving behind my tent. I kept running until I reached my car. When I got into my car, I looked back one last time towards the forest, and I saw something so terrifying that I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw multiple children with black eyes and white smiles hiding behind the trees, and they were just watching me and laughing. I drove back home, and I never went back to that forest again. I'm 25 years old today, and I still think about that night. What were those children doing in the forest? Who were those kids? Were they human at all, or were they something more evil than that? I'm happy that I didn't stay to find out.
I was 20 years old at that time, and I was working as a babysitter to pay for my college. I was hired to work at my neighbor's house to babysit their 3-year-old son. It was a weekend, and the neighbors told me that they were going out and would return the next day, and I had to watch their son until morning. So when they left, I let the kid watch TV and enjoy some pizza. It was a regular night, and I was texting my boyfriend. I got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. Once I was done drinking, I suddenly heard a faint noise. It sounded like a tapping noise. I thought it could be the TV, so I just ignored it. But then I heard it again. I tried to find the source of the noise, but I couldn't. The noise stopped, so I just ignored it and went back to the living room again to watch TV with the kid. It was around 10 p.m. and I decided to put the child to sleep, as I wanted to relax as well. Once I put the child to sleep, I came back to the living room and decided to watch some movies to kill time. Suddenly, I heard that tapping noise again, so I decided to check it out. I realized that the sound was coming from one of the windows in the living room. When I approached the window, I could see a shadow-like figure standing outside the window. I panicked and started wondering who the heck this person was. The figure started tapping on the window again. And when I got closer to the window, I saw something so terrifying that I almost fainted. It was a man dressed up as a clown. The weirdest thing was that the man had a wide smile and he just kept on staring at me. I froze in shock and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, the man threw a brick on the window. That's when I realized the gravity of the situation. The maniac was trying to break into the house. I quickly ran upstairs to the child's room and grabbed the boy, and went into the bathroom and locked it from the inside. I called the cops, but they said it would take a while to reach. I suddenly heard the sound of a window breaking, and I realized that the clown man was inside the house. I began hearing footsteps and heavy breathing climbing the stairs and coming closer to the bathroom. The man started calling out for me and said, "Come on out, I just want to play with you." That scared me so much that I had to keep my mouth closed. I realized that the clown was standing just outside the bathroom door. At any second, he could try to come inside, but lucky for me, he passed the door of the bathroom and went into another room. I took this opportunity and grabbed a metal pipe that was in the bathroom and quietly went and stood beside the bathroom door. When I heard the clown enter the master bedroom, I snuck up behind him and hit him on the head as hard as I could with the metal pipe. The man immediately fell off the ground and passed out. I quickly grabbed the child and ran to my house and waited for the police to arrive. Fortunately, the police arrived in a few minutes, and when they reached the house, the clown man was still lying on the floor unconscious. They grabbed the man and took him into the police car. They found that he was holding a knife all this time, and they also found his car parked near the street. When they searched his car, they found different types of tools, like a rope and a gun. Later on, the police found out that the guy was a wanted criminal who had multiple charges of kidnapping and rape of young girls. I thank God that I was lucky that night and did not end up one of his victims.
This happened to me around 3 years ago. My name is Jason, and I live in a small town with my family. I was 17 years old at the time, and I used to hang out with my friend David. We were just dumb teenagers, and there wasn't much to do in our town, as it just had one main street, a few shops, and a high school that had more classrooms than students. However, there was an abandoned subway in our town that wasn't used for many years, as it was shut down due to heavy rains. One night, David and I were hanging out at my place, and we were just getting bored. So I just suggested that we could go and explore the abandoned subway for fun. David agreed and said that we might even end up finding something valuable. So we head out. Once we reached the entrance of the subway, we turned on our flashlights and entered it. The tunnel was completely dark, and there were no lights except our flashlights. As we went deeper into the tunnel, our shoes got wet, as the tunnel had a lot of water in it because of the heavy rains, and the subway drainage system hadn't been maintained in years. We found many old things in the tunnel, like old newspapers, jackets, and even old women's handbags. David found the stairs that led to the subway tracks. I was excited, as it was the most fun thing we had done in a long time. We started talking to each other about how the subway used to be very busy when it was active and all. But then suddenly, David just stopped talking and told me to be quiet. I didn't understand and asked him what had happened. But he told me to be quiet again, and I saw his expression change. He looked like he was listening to something. David was facing in the direction of the tunnel, from where the subway usually used to arrive at the train station. David looked at me and whispered if I heard a noise. I told him that I didn't hear anything, and that he was just imagining things, or he was just trying to prank me or something. But then, all of a sudden, I heard that noise too. It sounded as if someone, or something, was screaming from the inside of the tunnel. David and I froze, not knowing what it was and what to do. I told David that it could be someone trapped and might need our help. So we agreed and went into the tunnel. As we went deeper, the noise got louder and louder. Suddenly, David just stopped and grabbed my arm, and when I looked at him, I could see a terrified expression on his face. I asked him what had happened, and he just pointed his finger towards the tunnel. And when I looked in the direction, I was shocked and horrified at what I saw. We could see something tall, too tall for a person, almost hunched over because of the height of the tunnel. Its skin, or whatever it had instead of skin, was pale, stretched tight over its bones, like it was too big for its own body. It didn't even have a face, just these hollow, empty spaces where eyes should have been. It was just standing there and watching us. I've never felt terror like that before. Then It started to move, slow, deliberate steps, like it was an animal that was hunting us. Suddenly, David screamed and told me to run, and I did. We burst out of the tunnel, not stopping, until we were completely out of that subway and back onto the main street. I didn't even look back. I just heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Too many footsteps, more than just ours. And that horrible screaming noise, louder now, almost like it was inside my head. We finally got out of that subway and made it back to my place. We sat outside my house, out of breath, silently, without saying a word to each other. After we calmed down, we discussed what we had just experienced, but none of us had an explanation as to what we had just seen down in the subway. One thing was for certain, that whatever that thing was, it wasn't human at all. That night, we didn't tell anyone what happened. We just went home, pretending everything was normal. I'm 20 years old today, and David and I are still best friends. But from time to time, we still discuss about our experience in that subway. We are just happy that we made it out alive. And I thank David for screaming and getting me out of that tunnel. Or else, who knows what would have happened if that creature would have gotten to me. This happened to me around 2 years ago. My name is Luke, and I'm from a town in Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time, and my best friend, Kevin, was 17. We went to the same high school, and we used to do everything together. Our school wasn't anything special, just your typical high school with too many rules and not enough fun. Anyway, we weren't the kind of kids who took school seriously. We did our homework and all, but most of the time we were just looking for ways to get out of it. So, when the school announced a trip to Franklin Castle in Ohio, we were both pretty excited. Franklin Castle is this old, supposedly haunted mansion in Cleveland. The teacher said it was for a history lesson, but honestly, we were just more interested to see if we were able to find any ghost or something like that. You know, just dumb teenager curiosity. People say the place is haunted by the ghosts of the family who lived there. There were rumors about mysterious deaths, secret rooms, and a whole lot of creepy stuff. Kevin and I were all in. The day of the trip, we both got on the bus with everyone else, but we already had a plan. The castle was huge, and we figured it wouldn't be hard to slip away from the group and explore on our own. As soon as we arrived, it didn't disappoint. The place was massive and gloomy, even in daylight. It had these tall, pointed towers and hundreds of windows, like something out of a horror movie or something. Inside, it was even creepier. Dusty old furniture, dark wood walls, and weird creaking sounds coming from above us. It was the kind of place where you felt like someone or something was always watching you. Our class stuck together at first, going from room to room, while the guide gave us a boring lecture on the castle's history. Kevin and I exchanged a few looks, silently agreeing it was time to make our move. We slipped away during one of the tours, ducking down a hallway that seemed mostly untouched by the modern world. It was darker there, quieter, and that's when Kevin spotted a door. It was locked, but the sign next to it said, "Basement off limits." We both knew it was a bad idea. I mean, everything about the door screamed, "Don't go in." But we were curious, and Kevin, being Kevin, grinned at me and said, "Come on, let's check it out." He jiggled the handle a few times before it gave way with a loud creak, and we stepped into a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. It was cold down there, colder than the rest of the castle. Our footsteps echoed as we descended, flashlights in our hand, some strange smell. It was awful and foul, and it hit us immediately. The basement was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb at the bottom of the stairs, but even in the half-light, you could tell it hadn't been touched in years. Dust covered everything, and old tools and furniture were scattered around. There was this thick feeling in the air, like we were breathing in decades of decay. Kevin was ahead of me, poking around when he suddenly froze. I asked him what was up, but he didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at something in the corner of the room. I couldn't see what he was looking at, so I walked over at him, shining my flashlight in the same direction. And that's when I saw it as well. At first, it just looked like a pile of rags, just dark, crumpled rags sitting there on the ground. But then, it moved slowly. The rags shifted, and underneath them was something alive. A figure crouched in the shadows. Its body was wrong, too thin, with limbs that seemed too long for a person. Its skin was dark and leathery, stretched over its bones that were way too sharp. And its face, you couldn't even call it a face. It was twisted, almost human, but not exactly. Its eyes were glowing, red and small, and they locked onto us the moment we shone the light on it. For a second, neither of us moved. I think we were both trying to convince ourselves we weren't seeing what we were seeing. Kevin was the first one to move. He grabbed my arm, and without saying a word, we bolted up the stairs, not even bothering to look back. The air around us felt heavy, like something was chasing us. But I didn't dare turn around to see if it was following us. I just ran faster than I've ever ran before. We burst back into the hallway, breathless and pale, and joined the group like nothing happened. No one noticed we had been gone, and we didn't say a word to anyone, not a single word. 2 years later, I still don't know what that thing was. Kevin and I haven't talked about it since that day, but I can tell he remembers everything. Every time we pass an old building or see something out of the corner of our eyes, there's this strange, unspoken understanding between us. Whatever was in that basement, it definitely wasn't human. And I'm glad that we didn't stay to find out. My name is Evan, and this happened to me about 5 years ago. I used to live in a small town in Pennsylvania. It was one of those towns where everyone knew each other, but it still had its secrets. I used to hang out a lot with my friend Matt. He and I had known each other since middle school, and we were pretty close. Matt lived in a large Victorian-style home on the outskirts of the town. It had this strange, eerie vibe, but I never thought much of it until one weekend when everything changed. It was a Friday evening, and Matt had invited me over to spend the night. His parents were out of town for the weekend, so it was just the two of us. We had the whole place to ourselves, and at first, it was just a regular night, ordering pizza, playing video games, and messing around like we usually did. Later that night, I noticed something strange. Every so often, I heard a faint knocking sound coming from somewhere in the house. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was the old pipes or maybe the wind. Mac didn't seem to notice it, so I didn't bring it up, but the sound never stopped. After a while, I asked Matt about it, jokingly, like, "Dude, is your house haunted or something?" He laughed it off and said, "This place makes just weird noises sometimes, because it's an old house and all." But the way he said it, it felt weird, like he wanted to ignore the topic. At around midnight, we were still in his living room playing a game, when the knocking noise got louder. It wasn't just faint taps anymore. It sounded louder, like it was coming from beneath us. That's when I looked over at Matt, and I noticed that his expression had changed. He wasn't laughing anymore. I looked at Matt and asked him if he heard the noise again. Matt hesitated for a second, and then told me that he heard it too, and not to worry about it. He was trying to ignore it. I pushed a little, asking if there was something going on, and that's when he finally told me about the basement. He told me that his family never went down there. His parents had always kept it locked, and told him never to go down there no matter what. Matt said he didn't know why, but there were rumors, stories his parents told him when he was younger. They used to say that the basement was off limits because something really bad had happened down there a long time ago, but they never explained what exactly had happened. Naturally, I got really curious, and I suggested that we should check it out, but Matt refused. He looked genuinely freaked out by the idea, which only made me want to go down there even more. I figured it was probably just some old family story, nothing real. So, after a bit of convincing, Matt reluctantly agreed to show me the door to the basement, but he made me promise we wouldn't go down there. We walked over to this old wooden door in the hallway. that I hadn't even noticed before. It was plain with a rusty lock hanging from it. Matt got a key from the kitchen drawer and unlocked it, slowly opening the door. The smell that came out was musty, like old wood, and something else, but I couldn't quite understand it. It wasn't bad, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I shined my phone's flashlight down the narrow staircase. It was steep and led into complete darkness. The steps creaked as I put one foot on the top stair, and that's when Matt grabbed my arm. He told me that we should seriously not go down there, but I was already too curious. I shrugged him off, saying that it would only take a minute. So I started going down the stairs, and Matt reluctantly followed behind me. When we got to the bottom, the air felt colder. It was almost as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees. The basement was large, with old, dusty furniture scattered around, boxes, a few broken chairs, and some shelves with random junk on them. But something didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it, but there was this heavy feeling, like the air was pressing down on us. Then I saw it, a small iron door built into the far wall, almost hidden behind some old boxes. It looked out of place, like it didn't belong there. I walked closer to it, and that's when Matt grabbed my arm. This time he looked terrified and told me that he doesn't know what's behind the door, but we should never open it. But I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed the handle, and to my surprise, it wasn't locked. It creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow, dark hallway. At the end of the hallway, there was another room, barely visible in the dim light from my phone's flashlight. We stepped inside, and that's when I noticed the walls. They were covered in strange symbols, painted in what looked like dried blood. The air was thick with this terrible metallic smell, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Matt was whispering behind me, saying that we needed to leave immediately, but I was frozen in the place. Then we heard it, the sound of footsteps coming from the room. At the end of the hallway, we both froze, staring down the dark corridor. The footsteps grew louder, and that's when I saw it. A tall, dark shadow figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was so tall that I knew it wasn't human at all. It was staring directly at us. That was enough for me. I grabbed Matt and we bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind us. We didn't say a word to each other. We just sat there in silence, trying to process what had just happened. After that night, Matt told me that his parents sold the house and moved a few months later. He never spoke about the basement again, and I never asked. To this day, I don't know what we stumbled upon down there, but whatever it was, I'll never forget the feeling of dread that washed over me when we heard those footsteps. It wasn't human, I'm sure of that. And I'm just glad that we got out of there before we could really find out what it really was.